But welcome to the Smart Curriculum Academy this afternoon. My name is Chris Jones, CEO of CJ Learning and CJ Learning Technologies. We're here this afternoon for the next in our series of leadership webinars. I'll introduce our guest in a moment, but just to welcome you, if I could just ask you to turn your microphone, that's it, to silent. If you have any questions that you'd like to add as we work through this afternoon, please just drop them in the chat and we'll be able to see them there. And there will be an invitation if you want to ask questions a little later on. Cameras are off at the moment, so if you want to say or include something, please just drop them in the chat and we'll include that as we go through. So Smart Curriculum leadership webinars were based on the idea of bringing in people, experts and practitioners in their fields to discuss school matters and to bring elements of innovation and change and what's going on, particularly in this quite challenging period that we've just been through. We started in the summer and we've done probably one a month or certainly two a month in some months over the summer. But I'd just like to welcome Susan Fielden to us, a finance expert. I'll leave her to tell a little bit of her story in a moment. But this afternoon our focus is on school finances made simple. If ever that's possible, we'd like to think that it's possible. But Susan's going to talk to us about really getting down to what are the things that we need to know as school leaders. Others will join us this afternoon, but welcome for you being here and welcome, Susan. Thank you for being here with us. Over to you. Introduce yourself to us and we'll begin.
Thank you, Chris. I've spent most of my working life dealing with finances in the public sector, but most of it with education, with school leaders, and most recently working directly with leaders in schools, academies, multi-academy trusts, and the occasional local authority, and bits of work with the DfE as well. And ever since the very first conversation I had with Chris, it was very clear that we shared a perspective on school finance and the effective use of school funding so that it can make a real difference to the realization of an education leader's vision for children and their outcomes. And whilst our methods might be slightly different, I think that common theme has led to many a long conversation and putting the world to rights around the need for school leaders to know just enough about school finance and funding so that they can make the decisions that they need to make in a timely and secure manner. I've got a set of slides more as a framework for this conversation, and I'm very, very happy to be interrupted with questions and comments, and I'm looking to Chris to keep an eye on all of that, and to interrupt me if he can get a word in edgeways.
Yeah, Susan, is it worth just to say that this is these webinars are not intended to be lectures. They are about a conversation. Now, obviously, it depends on the group of people that we have with us, and you're going to introduce some details to us. But I re-emphasize, if you've got something and you don't want to say it out loud, put it in the chat and we can include it, and I'll draw that in. But this is intended to be a conversation, and if you don't engage in that, we will have a conversation and probably put the world to rights again, as we do when we generally speak. But Susan, go on. Do you want to share your screen and we'll...
Yes, I'll do that now. I can manage it. Has that worked?
Yes, we can see. That's great. Thank you.
Excellent. So I wanted to start with just boiling down my perspective around school finance and into just two core themes, really. The need to be secure and safe. This is we're dealing with public money, we're dealing with uncertainty and risk, and a certain amount of framework around you as a school leader to keep that money safe and yourself safe is important. And but it's important not to let that structure become too tedious and dampen down your creativity, because the other important thing is to make every pound count for children and young people and their learning. And so it is those two things that are crucial for me when I'm looking at school finance. Whether that's about the way that you can interpret the numbers that you see as a school leader, whether that's the way that you report to those people who are in a governing position, whether that's an academy trust board or a governing body, or through to the government in terms of statutory reporting, whether it's about the way that you're managing risk and dealing with the uncertainty that is inherent in the system, but also most importantly to make sure that you are getting all that you need from the limited money that is available to you. I'm very conscious that for many school leaders, the concerns around the funding and the finances are the things that keep them awake at night, and they are and it is the stuff, some of the stuff that gets in the way of the real job. So I'm hoping that I can share a few insights this afternoon to get the thing back in its box.
You refer to public funds.
Yes.
And the taking responsibility for public funds. There is a difference in school financing in that there are funds that come from the government and there are funds that you make yourself. And there are some different things about those.
Yeah, well, I mean, the vast majority of the funding certainly in the sector that I work with, the state-funded education sector, will be coming from the government through a variety of formula-driven grants, mainly related to pupil numbers, and most of those don't have a separate accountability reporting line. There is just an expectation that leaders in schools and academies are using the money wisely for the purposes it was intended, i.e. delivering education. But over and above that, a school to a greater or lesser extent will be looking to raise money from parents and from other sources to either supplement the provision that they're making, or in some cases pay for specific things, whether it's trips or after school clubs or lunches or other activities, and those come with a different responsibility to deliver usually to parents the experience that they think they've paid for.
Yeah. I mean, it was just that there's a difference between those two, isn't there? Yeah. That's the point. And some people don't. I mean, certainly the conversations that I have, they don't see those differences. And we don't mix those bits of money.
Well, I think it's interesting because in some cases you do mix them. You do mix it all up. So a primary school with a nursery provision will be mixing an element of grant funding that's coming from the government through the local authority for the free entitlement for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, together with fees from parents who are paying for something over and above that, additional hours and weeks. So in some cases you are mixing different funding and income streams, and they come with different levels of risk. Some are more secure and certain than others. Some are easier to predict, and we're trying to make it simpler, Chris. I'm diving into all the complexities here. I think that the important thing, I think, for a starting point on the question about where's your money coming from, is particularly if you're new to a position of responsibility in a school, would be to take stock and understand how much of your income is coming through formula-driven grant streams, and how much is going to be dependent on either the activities that you're putting on or the efforts you make to persuade people to part with their money. And the extent to which your core provision is underpinned by some fluctuating local income. You need to be alive to that risk as you judge, you know, how the school is going to be resourced in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And risk is certainly on a lot of people's minds at the moment, with things changing in that thing. I won't steal your thunder on terms of moving forward, but that's a big issue, isn't it, with schools now?
Yes, I think, you know, there's so much uncertainty, and I will come on to that in a bit later. It would be very easy to imagine that you can't make any predictions about the future, and yet as a leader in the education system, that is absolutely what you must do, because any improvements, any changes, or just any careful, prudent planning will require you to look 2 or 3 years ahead, and so somehow, one way or another, you need to just beat that uncertainty into submission, and try and give your plans a bit of shape.
Yeah, again, in the conversation is that your second point about risk management and then moving to uncertainty. The one thing about the times that we're in is that there's a great deal of uncertainty, and people are. I take from what you've just said is that ability and that discipline to look further ahead and not just to be gazing where we are now. You know, buying my cleanser and sanitizers and things, but actually we're thinking a lot ahead of about what's coming. But I'm not going to steal your thunder, so keep going.
Yeah, you're right. It's but that is the leadership role, isn't it? To be able to juggle between the here and now, the right this minute, responsive, and looking further ahead, scanning the horizon, and moving things forward. That is the leadership challenge.
Absolutely.
All of these things and that right hand side, I'm going to cover, unless anybody tells me they're really not at all interested in them. What I wanted to share with you next, and this is the model that I use when I'm working with a school, academy, multi-academy trust, or indeed even a local authority. And if there's one thing that I like to give you through this session, it would be this heart, and a suggestion that whenever you want to make schools' finances and the connection between the school's finance and the rest of your ambition for the school, what I would suggest is take a large sheet of paper, a sheet of A3 paper, put a heart in the middle, a small heart in the middle, and then use the space around it to capture some of the things that are driving and changing over the next few years. This framework provides me always with an opportunity to bring together and capture the issues around how are the pupil numbers changing, how's that influencing the nature of the provision that you want to make, the size of your classes, the timetable, the structure, the number of teachers, the level of support those children need, how those pupil numbers are also driving your funding and your income, and what is happening for you around your overheads and operational costs, those things that make no difference to teaching and learning, but absolutely have to come out of your budget. And how do you bring all of those things together to make the resources that you've got available to you make the biggest difference. I've found over a number of occasions that just sitting down and talking to a head with a large sheet of paper and a small heart in the middle, we can just start to explore some of the key tensions and uncertainties around all of the blobs around that heart. I'll come back to this at the end, but I offer this to you as a shape for capturing the key elements that are going to bind your use of money in a school with the things that really make a difference to children and young people.
helpful model. You know, that's the guts of what we're about, isn't it? The you know, the elements that you've put there.
Yes, and I've got a there's a blog on my website that just offers a suggested framework for a 90 minutes, just having a strategic moment in a busy day. It's my Close Your Eyes and Think of the Children blog, and it's just provided a really useful way to reflect on the things that are important and the things that are challenging, and get them all into one place so that you can connect the financial decisions with the educational ones.
Yeah. So important. So important.
Before I get too far into that sort of strategic loveliness and make using resources in the most cost-effective way, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the tedious rules. And that's not to go into anything in enormous detail, unless there are lots of questions that you want me to answer. Well, and I'm entirely happy to do that. But I wanted to offer you another framework, and this is relating to the rules and procedures it is wise to have in place as you're leading and managing a school. And there will almost certainly be, if you're new to a school, new to a position of leadership, there will be an existing finance policy. If you're in a maintained school, it will be driven by the local authority's financial management scheme, and an academy, it will be the academy's financial handbook, and it might be informed by challenges that have emerged out of audits or inspections or changes that you've made locally. But I've found that this framework has given me a structure for cutting through a whole load of text and detail to just nail down the important characteristics of the way we do things around here. So how is it we think we are going to do budget planning? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And how are we going to connect it with the other decisions that we take? How are we doing in our school, academy, multi-academy trust, in our organisation? How are we going to keep on top of our income and expenditure as we go through the year? Who's going to do what? When are they going to report? Who are they going to tell? What are they going to do if they find a problem? Nuts and bolts, how are we managing income? How do we ensure that we've got the money coming in that's due to us? And how are we stopping our organisation leaking money where it shouldn't be? How are we avoiding somebody buying their dog food and taking it home at the end of the day, or falling foul of some of the many scams that are around at the moment? What are we checking on a monthly basis? What have we got in terms of levels of delegation? Who needs to sign things in order to approve them? At what threshold? And who are we reporting to? How often? And in what sense? And there are probably only, I don't know, half a dozen bullet points that are really, really important in each of those sections, just to get a starting point, an initial handle on how things work and how you want them to work as a school leader. And I would say, just in terms of getting a sense of realism, that it takes probably about a year to really feel comfortable that you know how your organisation ticks, and how to make the best use of a framework of rules that provide some space for creativity, but the right amount of security. And I'm happy to talk a lot more about that, but this is the tedious end of school finance rather than the exciting end.
And each school, perhaps the context for each school, the security of the role, because you said in the last section, the number of children in the school, it's, you're funded based on those. So keeping a good eye on on your midterm admissions, your role, and one of the things that I find with schools that have sixth forms, the courses that they're entered to. Excuse me. So make sure that they're in the right number of hours. That's always a challenge for schools. But so what you're saying is that there are key markers, maybe 6 things in each of those sections that you'd just be good to have a handle on.
Yes, and I think just because nobody wants to be saying no all of the time, but a structure and a framework within which you can safely make financial decisions is just one of the things that's going to stop you worrying, waking up at night in the middle of the night and worrying about the finances, because you've put in place a regular checkpoint every month where you're going to sit down and have a look at the numbers with the as the head, with the school business manager, or that nobody can authorize spending above 5,000 or 1,000 or whatever the level is that you set, and how it is that the invoices get paid, so how the money comes in, how it goes out, and you've got a shape around how you're keeping on top of it, and fairly early on in a new leadership role, you want to be acquainting yourself with the way things work in that organization, and taking an opportunity periodically to step back and saying, am I really comfortable with that? Does anything need to be tighter? Is anything too tight? And just flexing around that. And I'd say, give it a good year before trying to rewrite a policy.
I think that's good advice. Yeah.
Because otherwise you just get bogged down in the detail. You need to just have a sense of, does it feel safe? Does it feel like we've got the balance right between, limiting everybody's, authority, and but stopping, the mad purchasing of dog food or the like.
Yeah. And those things happen in all sorts of places, don't they? And it's being able to, the checks and balances to make sure that they don't happen. Yeah.
Yes. Because it just takes so long to pick up the pieces afterwards.
Yeah.
It's absolutely one of those bits that, in a small amount of tedious process, can just save you ages if it goes wrong. Somebody, in terms of the bottom right hand box, once somebody's starting to question, somebody from outside is starting to question the safety of your procedures in the school, you've got them crawling all over you and looking at everything. Then you're just, that you're definitely not doing the day job at that point.
You don't want actions from the auditor. They're when they start saying there are things to do, then you know that there are things that haven't been done.
Yeah. So I don't know whether anybody had got any questions in relation to any of that sort of safety and security stuff.
I haven't got anything particularly here at the moment.
Okay.
Susan, keep going for a second. There are a couple of questions I've got here that have come through, but not related to that bit.
Okay. All right. So I've got a couple of slides about risk and uncertainty, but this is the one about risk, and I just I wanted to. There's an opportunity around this slide to pick up some of the baffling terminology if anybody's interested in some of that. But I wanted particularly to just focus in on a few things about where things can go wrong that aren't necessarily quite so straightforward as having a procedure to avoid it. And they're probably about human frailty. So over the course of my career, there have been goodness knows how many occasions when some windfall money arrives, and multiple people have a very good idea about how we can spend it. And if you're not careful, it's spent at least twice, if not more times. And then if you're really unlucky, somebody has used that windfall money and employed somebody on an ongoing contract, and so they've got some one-off money trying to resource a bit of ongoing spending. So lovely as the windfall is, it always needs to be treated with a degree of caution before everybody gets terribly excited. I sounded like a terrible killjoy at this point, but
I was going to say, have you any examples? I mean, I can think of a couple of examples where I've had to unpick those sort of things, but you know, what sort of windfall money were you thinking of? And
well, so as a for instance, so the sort of thing that might happen is somebody, you've got a really excellent teacher in the school, and there's an opportunity to generate a bit of income by lending them to another school. They go off and do a bit of consultancy, so you've got a bit of consultancy income coming in. And that looks marvelous, and everybody says, "Oh, the benefit of we've shared a member of staff, we've offered some of our resource, and we can invest in something brilliant for the children on the back of that," which would be fine, apart from if the school business manager, as part of trying to balance a difficult budget, had anticipated some consultancy income. And so you had already built in the expectation of that income into the budget and had already planned how to spend it. So it's not really a bonus. It feels like a bonus, but it isn't. It was already anticipated. And I think that's the usual risky area where actually that income was already in the budget, and it's not extra at all.
No, I concur with you on that. I mean, I've seen several examples of, I mean, particularly in areas like sport, where that consultancy might be sports members of staff that in a secondary might be sold to a group of primaries. But then if the primaries don't buy into that, then the secondary is left with covering the salary. And it may be that was generated by a grant in the first place, but then it's not sustained over time. Yeah. Similarly, there are great ideas around IT and IT servicing and you know, employing people that are available. But then if that doesn't return in budget, then obviously someone's carrying the load. So there's some real examples of that kind of thing happening.
I think the other one that's similar to that is the sort of, you know, pupil premium grant or PE sports premium, where it's possible to be having a conversation around a senior leadership team about the extra things you can do with that money, but if that income has been anticipated when the budget's been set, then that has already been spent. It's already earmarked.
Is there a moral impact of that too? Because those kind of the kind of things that you've just referred to are actually given to the children that are in your school, and you know they need to be spent on the children in the school, rather than using that for some other creative ideas to generate other income. That's an interesting position.
Yes, I think the extra bit I would add to that is of course, if you're looking at your overall position from a strategic perspective across a number of years, then there might be ways in which, still for the benefit of you know, approximately the same group of children, you might be investing 1 year to reap the rewards in a future year. Or vice versa, you know, spending now and paying for it later.
Yes. I mean, that's some of the advantages of the systems that we've now got in place, and that is the, you know, efficiency is what we're looking for.
Yes. Yes, and I think, you know, some of the other things on here, I've definitely seen examples of. For example, if your financial systems aren't giving you reliable information, that's a really tricky place to be, because the one thing a head teacher wants to know from their finance lead is, can I afford to do X, Y, and Z? You know, and they want to know now. And if you can't rely on the information in your finance system, then either you've got the wrong answer to that question, or you've got a delay whilst the finance lead goes away and ponders over a complicated spreadsheet. And so some of the, again, it's one of those bits of tedious detail, but accurately recording your income and expenditure isn't just for the accountants. It's so that you can rely on the systems that you've got and get the answers quickly.
And
And
quite often that's around staffing, often, isn't it? It's the can I afford this person that's come in the door? So all of those, or the creative staffing decisions that neglect on costs and full year impact, but they are the kind of decisions that people are looking for, aren't they? Can I appoint this person now?
Yes, and the back of the envelope calculation could well lead you to a significant, particularly on staffing, that a rush decision that doesn't take account of the extra costs for national insurance and pension contributions and the full year impact if you're going over the end of a financial year. Then some of those things can really destabilize your budget if you're not alert to them.
The sticky subject of on costs. Did you want to comment on that? we talked about that one the other day, didn't we?
Yes, it's one of those things that I think finance people take for granted. That everybody knows that a member of staff costs more than just their salary, but it isn't something that everybody does know. Over and above the national insurance contributions and tax and pension that are taken out of an individual's salary, the employing organisation will have to pick up costs and pay those over to the government and the pension funds, and so the cost of employing a member of staff can be 35% more than just the basic salary. And that's that can definitely drive a coach and horses through your careful budget planning if you haven't factored that in.
Oh, absolutely. I had a conversation with schools this morning that was the very centre of the conversation, and they didn't realise that at least the leader was not aware of that implication of cost.
Yes.
Can I ask you another question? It's something different, because you've got on the sheet in front of you the issue of current costs and lagged funding. That's another aspect of school that people don't necessarily realise, this issue of lagged funding. Is there's some comment on?
Yeah, so most of the grant funding streams are based on pupil numbers, but they are based on pupil numbers that are potentially a year out of date. And so that's really beneficial if you are in a school with a fall in roll, because you've got some cushion between the reduction in the funding and the reality of the provision you'll need to be putting in place. But if you're in a growing, if you've got a growing role, then you will be finding that the funding is always lagging behind the growth in numbers of pupils, and therefore the provision that you need to make. And just understanding the impact. And so as we're coming up towards the local authorities across the country making decisions about the formula funding for schools for the coming financial year, starting in April if you're a maintained school and September if you're an academy, that will still be based on the October pupil numbers from last year. So as soon as you get to the October census, you're able to start to think about what that's going to mean to your funding for the coming financial year. So it's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely, and as you might feel that a growing school, a school that's got its role that's increasing, is a great thing to be, and it is. But the biggest challenge is the funds that come with that are going to be the challenge for the next September. So there's some simple parts around that, but context matters hugely.
Yes, and I think it's worth saying that here there's there's a connection in my mind between the levels of risk that you face in a school and the financial consequences of those risks, and the level of reserves that you need to keep. Because if one of the risks that you're facing is that your demand for staff because of a changing role, whether that's numbers or need, but your demand for staff is going to be ahead of the change in your funding, then you're going to need to be looking at a way to plug that gap. And it might be that is about a planned draw on your reserves over a number of years in order to make the provision when you need it. And that, I think that's particularly the case in relation to making provision for children with additional needs and with special educational needs, where quite often the funding that you might be able to access, the additional funding that you might be able to access, is going to be, considerably after that child has arrived in your school and you need to start making provision. And so being resourced and ready to meet that gap is needs to factor into your planning.
Absolutely. Do you want to continue?
Yeah. So I think we've strayed into some of this one already about where does the funding and income come from, and I just wanted to draw attention. There's a little blob right up in this top right hand corner, excellent book by my former colleague Julie Cordner around forecasting your school funding. It's available on Amazon, and her together with her regular newsletter is a really easy and reliable way to keep on top of school funding changes and ways in which you can be forecasting how your funding is going to change in the future, because it is a bit complicated. I said lots of these grant streams are based on pupil numbers, but they're not based on necessarily the same pupil count. So some will use October and some will use January. Some will use, in a primary school, will include the reception year group, and some won't. Some will even include nursery children, and some won't. So getting to grips with exactly how each funding stream works is probably not something that a school leader wants to be wants to use as their mastermind specialist subject, but a general awareness of the key drivers for each of these funding streams is probably an important piece of upskilling that's worth having. The thing that is important, and I think I've got this on the next one. Yes, the thing that's going to be important in terms of forecasting what's happening to your funding and income for the future, and indeed building any sort of sense of a strategic financial plan, is to nail some assumptions, to try to tame some of the uncertainty in the system, and I use that sort of plan, do, review type cycle. For me, in terms of assumption, it's plump, document, use and review. So there are many things on this sheet that are uncertain and unpredictable, and some things that, quite frankly, nobody on the planet knows how things are going to turn out. But in order to put together any sort of plan, you're going to need to plump for some sort of assumption about the way the future is going to change or stay the same. And in my mind, it's not fair to leave that to one person. So whether it's the head or CEO or the finance lead or whoever, in my mind, it's important to have a shared sense, probably across your senior leadership team, possibly even with the board, governors or trustees, to just get a sense of how you are taming the uncertainty, containing the variability, and on what basis are you going to plan but then keeping an eye on that, periodically checking in with it, because it won't be right. Things will change, and you need to keep on top of it. But you can't move forward unless you make a set of assumptions. To my mind, best if you do that as a group, best if you write it down, and absolutely keep an eye on it and keep reviewing it periodically.
And leading schools, I would say that's probably the, certainly having a budget plan, before you've got your statement of budget, that idea of pupil numbers and the likely needs, using all the intelligence sources that you can for your feeders, where are children coming from, what are their likely needs. It's really about having that conversation and using your team to draw all that information in to be as near to your estimates as you can be.
Yes. And what do we think is going to happen to costs, and how do we think future pension contributions are going to change? These aren't things you're going to know, but in order to build a budget, a financial strategy, and marry that up with the curriculum provision and the staffing structures that you want to be able to put in place, you've got to make some assumptions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you might want more than one planning scenario. You might have a really optimistic one and then a worst case one, or possibly even one in the middle as well. Although that then takes you to 3 different budgets. But it might be, and sometimes that's the way the board, the governing body or trustees would like to view it, and you've not necessarily got that choice as a head.
What's your experience and feel on that very matter of the board? I mean, the board has ultimate responsibility for this and agreeing the budget there, and the directors if they're a academy trust. But the level of experience among that board to support that process, rather than just take it, because otherwise the load is on the head teacher and on the business manager to say, well, this is it, please sign it off.
Yeah.
What's your feel on that conversation?
I think my feeling, and this I think this also dates back to years of working at a local authority and dealing with political councillors, members, would be that I think you can have a better informed and more useful conversation if you're structuring it around the assumptions than if you're presenting a complicated table of numbers. By the time you've got a detailed budget plan with 2 or 3 years worth of data on it, and you've got every single category of staff and stationery and electricity and all the rest of it, then you're leaving yourselves open to have a conversation at the board around the level of spend on stationery, or the company you use for energy supply, and this is a much the conversation about the assumptions that you're making about the way the world is going to change and the way that the school's going to respond to it. So including within those assumptions the basic parameters we use around class size, or option choices, or it's not just about costs, it's about how we are how we're shaping the decisions that we're going to take as we build a budget that's going to resource our school. And I think a conversation with governors, trustees around the assumptions and the parameters early on, before you start getting any numbers involved, is a much better place to be engaging at that strategic level.
I would agree, absolutely. And certainly our experience in Smart Curriculum is, when we're having that conversation at board level, I've had people say to me, well, I think the conversation was going to be about which budget lines are we going to be slashing because we need to reduce the budget. But actually, it's turned into a conversation about core purpose, so what's the education look like? How are we resourcing it? What is our purpose around the curriculum and staffing strategies, and which I concur with you. I think that is where those conversations need to be. The servicing it from a budget point of view is just to make sure that those purposes are achieved.
Yes, I'd be much happier to be having a long conversation with trustees or governors around these the assumptions and parameters, and then a really short conversation that says we've used those, we've put the numbers in, it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or it doesn't, and here's the tension, and this is what we think we can do about it. But not tables of numbers, because no one other than an accountant wants to see tables of numbers.
No, absolutely, and governance is about the purpose, and that's the conversation that needs to be happening. Yeah.
So I'm thinking that we've talked a bit about the sort of financial procedures and rules, and we've talked a bit about some of the budget planning assumptions and risks and things, and I'm sensing that this is we've probably got quite a long way away from the effective resourcing of the educational provision that as a leader you're hoping to be bringing to fruition in your school. So I just wanted to, because it always helps me, I just wanted to go back to my heart shape, because it brings back for me the fundamentals around pupils and your ambition for them, and how you are dealing with the most significant part of the school's budget is going to be staffing. Out of that, the most significant part is going to be teaching, and teachers and support staff are going to be the people that make the biggest difference to children and their learning. So it's starting with that, and being clear that you've got that element in balance. It has got to be the starting point, and I would. There've been a number of occasions when we've had some real eye-opening conversations, and you'll be doing this all of the time in your work, Chris, where the school leadership team have got a general sense about what's happening to pupil numbers over the next 2 to 3 years. They've got an understanding about where it might be going, but haven't turned that into, so what does that mean for the timetable? What does it mean for the option structure? What does it mean for the class structure? And where's the pinch points? And when are we going to have to make that decision? Because it's quite a long way back from the point at which it hits. And so just at a really high level, rolling things forward, what does our provision look like in 3 years? And I usually go 3 years and then work back. So in 3 years' time, what do we think our pupil numbers are going to be? What do we think the level of need is going to be? What do we do with that in terms of provision? What do we think the shape of our school is going to be in 3 years' time? Yeah, bringing together the shape of the educational provision in 2-3 years' time, and then working backwards and having a strategic sense of when the right moment is to check in with that plan, with that structure, and take some decisions and move things forward, because the timely change to a class structure in a primary school where the numbers have changed gradually, hitting that moment is really crucial. That if you just go a little bit too far, and run that extra class for another year, then you're on the back foot, and school budgets are not sufficiently, they've not got sufficient headroom to give you the flexibility to respond to that, unless you hit the moment.
And relating to that, you referred earlier to that reserves question, and I think there's a lot of schools that are asking the question, what's an appropriate reserve? Because you said, so you've got this money you're putting aside, and sometimes you need to draw on it, sometimes it's there for investment later. But that really speaks to what you've just said, it's that protecting yourself against those risks.
Yes, it's about knowing the risks that you can manage, going right back to the sort of safety and security, and understanding the things that you can exercise some control of, and protecting yourself with for those that you can't. And so the same way that that you would be taking out insurance, in your personal life to deal with the risks that you can't control, the same is true in relation to school. And some of that might be, what if your pupil numbers took a dive. I work with a lot of very small schools, and one family moving out of the village can make a significant difference to the finances, and tip a school, off a step and into only being able to afford one fewer class. Understanding that risk and knowing how long you've got before you can adjust your structure to meet the new reality, and holding enough money for that eventuality. I mean, you don't want to be stashing lots of money away, but to my mind, it's not a straightforward percentage. It's not a 1 month's salary's worth. It ought to be related to the level of risk that you're facing, and only the school leadership team and board will be able to get the best perspective on that.
And that context conversation is so important. So the security of the school, its position, exactly as you just described. A small rural school that's going to be impacted by one family leaving, that's got to be a measured risk, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I'd like to also refer to the conversation. I mean, you've referred to the work that we do with, Smart Curriculum is about curriculum design and staffing to service that, and then within budget. One of the things we haven't used this wonderful term, integrated curriculum finance planning, or ICFP, that's doing the rounds. One of the reasons for this conversation, Susan, is, what I'm finding, we come at it from the curriculum and school leadership and education end. You're coming at it from the finance end. And in a sense, what I see more of a need for, certainly in the English education system, is the joined up conversation. And it's, you're bringing these principles from a finance point of view. We want to have that conversation with education and education provision and what we're doing to get the results for the children or the outcomes for the children. But it's having that joined up conversation that really matters. That's the really, interesting part in this conversation.
Yeah, and actually that's I'm going to skip past that the next slide I had, but I think my penultimate point was in relation to that, the importance of the relationship between the leader in a school, whether that's the head or the CEO in a multi-academy trust, and the finance lead, that quite often they've got a different perspective on the same issues, and most of the decisions a leader will take have got some financial consequences, and most of the decisions about finances have got some impact on teaching and learning and the ability of staff across the school to do what they need to do to support children and their learning, and that relationship is so crucial, and investing in that relationship and taking action if it's not right is really important. Not letting it slip if that that local relationship is not working.
No, absolutely. I was going to say, in terms of your point earlier on about the things to look for, if anything, in terms of the work that we've both done in our different contexts, it's been about building the relationship so that's secure. Because if all the other risks are in place and there's a risk in a poor relationship between these elements of the school, that's a bigger risk than anything. But they've got to be talking the same language. They have different work spheres, but they are all for the same purpose. Yes,
and there are probably, if you can invest in that relationship and build that trust, then I think I was just wanting to stress the importance of that relationship and investing in a little bit of time to get a sense. But I've put, what are the 6 key numbers that we should keep an eye on together. That as a school leader and with your finance lead, just going back to where are the risks and what are the things that might be causing us some difficulty, and what are the things that we should just between us keep an eye on. And it might be that it's how much cash is there in the bank, if you're particularly if you're an academy. It might be in some contexts, I worked with a school where they were having a significant challenge around the supply budget. And actually the crucial thing with supply is not to be monitoring it when you've paid the supply, it's to be monitoring it at the point at which you're approving, and also looking at the ways in which you're managing staff absence and supporting staff health and well-being. And it might be that there's a completely different metric that you want to be keeping an eye on together, that is way upstream of how much are we spending. So they're probably a different mix of magic numbers in each school, again depending on context.
And in the context of our conversation, just would you bring the governors into part of that conversation? Would you have some metrics that you would kind of have a conversation with them? I mean, obviously a lot of what you've just described is operational, and that would be not a governor level conversation. But would you how would you make that work in the governance?
Well, I'd definitely be advocating in addition to the sort of the important and detailed reports that you would be wanting to take to governors around finances, to have a high level dashboard, and probably with some pictures, not just numbers. I mean, the thing I absolutely loathe is governors being presented with tables of figures and no words. If you can add a picture in as well, it forces a discipline of getting to the heart of the matter and understanding the really important issue. And in a sense, anyone can table a spreadsheet, pulling out the 6 key issues, 6 key numbers, and being conscious of the most significant risks and the potential issues that are on the horizon. Those are the important things. And in a sense, for that conversation with governors, they really ought to be able to take as read that you've got the day-to-day under control. I mean, that's
a bit of education on both sides, isn't it? Because the governors don't need to be involved in that. But it is that it's having that. I mean, I'm with you. I would probably ban spreadsheets in governor meetings if I could.
Especially tabled, especially when they're tabled and not sent in advance, because you're working on them right up to the last minute.
But it doesn't get you to the key issues. It's just you're dealing with too much of the granular stuff. It's, as you're saying, and a lot of what you've said has been about that high level strategic. What are the risks? What are we doing about them? What can we mitigate? How do we mitigate?
I think you've just done my last slide there.
That shows we know where we've been, and we've sat at these tables.
Yes, pinch of reliable procedure and a sprinkling of regular and random checks, documented assumptions that you review periodically, work out what your magic numbers are and keep them in sight, and catch the risky things early. That's all there is. And keep drawing your heart.
And that's really key, isn't it? I mean, this is a calling, a passion, however people describe it. It is the heart of what we do is for the children, and it isn't just about having sheets that balance, but it's making sure that we're doing it for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to have to say, because a very interesting conversation, Susan. I'm sorry, we've managed the dog noises, and we've dealt with everything. Thank you so much for the input. I think it's a very valuable session.